Okay, students, thanks for coming. We are at the stage where we need to cast, we need to kind of turn the clay model into a plaster model, a more durable material. We do this with molding. Yeah, molding is a sort of an old, very well-established technique. It is a technique that also is used in the industry. The principle is very basic. You need to produce a negative shape in order to cast this into a positive shape. Yeah. Now we do this with a two-part mold. Yeah. And we do this. We're using. Lydia has already pre-produced these strips. So these are little metal strips, and we use a little shear. Okay, what I usually do, you need to assess, and I can help you there individually, where to run your mold. Yeah, usually you use the sort of the sticky outy parts. Yeah, so these parts, I wouldn't run the mold through here. I would run it along here. Yeah, and try to kind of separate them pretty much 50-50. Yeah. But you can also do like 60%, one part is slightly bigger than the other one. So it kind of depends a little bit on how the model turns out. So what we're going to do is, I first mark the sort of rough line where I want this to separate. Yeah. Peter, can you come a little bit closer with the camera? And I just kind of use the edge of one of these metal strips as an indication. I'm just going to mark it here. And I think I'm going to go down here. Either this one or this one. Let's take this one. Yeah, along here. So that gives you a little bit of a guideline, and then we have this one here. I'm going to make a little kink. Then I'm going to run it down there, all the way down. Now, it is good when the molds are generally half and half, but you want to have sometimes a little kink, a little edge inside, because if the mold, let's say if the mold would be totally flat, how would you make sure that these, they align? When they're like totally flat, they can move. But you want them that they are sort of interlocking. Yeah? So we can do that with making the mold. I mean, here naturally you kind of create a little kink. So you have this mold fitting in like this. Yeah? You want these molds to kind of lock into each other, without sort of being able that you can't move them. Yeah? But we can also produce artificial locks. So we produce locks. Yeah? What we're going to do with these strips is you're just going to start pushing them in. Yeah? Not too deep, so that you, and here I would sort of prepare a few ones. About a couple of inches. It kind of depends what you do and how detailed it is. Got this a little bit wrong there. Don't push them in too deep. And here's a little kink. I use a longer strip. So I make these little lockings, these little locks. Yeah. Flatter. And then I push this in. And then I continue this down. Yeah? And sometimes if you don't want to have this one here, these little edges here, it's not good. You can even that out. And we're very generous. We have plenty of these ones, and they're reusable. So when we're done with these ones, please put them in a bucket and we can reuse them. Sometimes it's quite good to just kind of cut this a little bit off. So you want to have a fairly nice, kind of, like a nice rolling boundary without any kinks inside. Yeah? Okay. Just a little bit. If you have to make some adjustments, it's not problematic. Throw these ones away. They're sharp. Be careful with your fingers. And then we will continue this all the way down. Yeah? That you basically have a running there. They should nicely align, yeah? Sometimes you have to kind of fill these deeper bits up. So that you have a proper separated area between left and right. Yeah? Okay. Video, you can stop now, press. Okay, now you can start filming.
Okay.
So when you have your bucket half full, this is the mixing area here. Yeah? So we have here our casting plaster. Oh, this is not properly open. I get it. The wrong scissors, but there you go. And Vidya just did a nice job here. And this is why when you open a bag, I always insist, and Vidya just did it nicely, we have an inner lining and an outer lining. The outer lining is really rough, and inside we have a fine lining. And this is exactly what we end up when we don't wrap the inner lining at the outside. It all muddles up in here, and it's really, really tricky to kind of get it out. So please don't do that, because it pisses me off. Because then you end up with, you know, a whole sort of kerfuffle. So you wrap it around outside, like this. So, beautiful. You can use your hands or this one, but I recommend you use your hands to start with. Hold on, and I also need the vital tool, the mixing trowel. Yeah, perfect. Oh, this is also my favorite one. I sanded these corners roundly, so this trowel should always be somewhere here. This is a nice mixing trowel. This is only for mixing plaster. Yeah. So what you do is you bring the dry plaster into the. It's really difficult to talk through this stupid mask. So you bring the plaster with both hands into the water really quickly until you have saturation point. And that's the tricky part. You need to mix a thick plaster. If you don't put enough plaster in, your plaster will be soft. It will not be suitable as a casting material, because it will literally, you can push your finger in if you don't have the ratio between plaster and water wrong. So you need to make sure that you have enough plaster in it. Usually we say until you have islands, but the islands go down. So you need to really make sure that it's well saturated. Okay. I'm going to take my glasses off because it's going to be messy now. So what I do, and I post this later on the Moodle website, I use both hands and I very quickly, so I mix it in the bag. I also have a YouTube video about how to mix plaster properly. Please watch it. Both hands, and then, oops, I bring it in fairly quickly. Don't dump it. You just rinse it through your finger like this. And then, while this is mixing, where's my other bucket? I have a second one. So you can see while this is, but you only start with one bucket, yeah? So I just mix two, because then I should be able to make the entire mold in one go. You don't want to have, you need to work quickly, and it's good to work in a team of two, that one mixes and the other one brings the plaster in. Here you can see I have islands, but it's still going down. It still disappears. So I think you should form a team of two, that one is mixing the plaster while you're working on the mold, and then you can help your partner. So this is kind of looking good because we've got proper islands and it's not sinking down too much anymore. This is where we have to be quick. So this is where the trowel comes in. Yeah? Don't go in with your hands. Don't go in with your hands. You need to do it with a trowel, because then you need to keep your fingers clean, at least one. So what I do is I spread it on the top like this. Sometimes you're just gonna knock it a little bit. And now I go in with a trowel and mix it. This is looking good, nice, thick enough. And you want to get all those lumps out. This looks like a good plaster now. Okay, Carrie, stop. You don't want to use the plaster and go straight onto it. I always decant. Just use half of it. By doing so, you can actually, now we have basically two buckets. We mixed it at the same time. But you will see, the more you activate the plaster when working it, the quicker it dries. So you actually, from one mix, we have basically one mix, we will have 3 stages of hardness. And this is the trick. So basically, what you need to do is, you need to bring this plaster here, and you need to bring it in with force. This is the messy part, but it shouldn't be messy. So I always do, make your hand of the shape of a dumpling or a lily, yeah, like this. And in here is the plaster. This is nice, feels good. And what I do now, I bring it in, yeah. And you need to throw it, yeah. And this is not the problem. This is the problem. Yeah, you need to flick it. Yeah? And you walk around. And this is, you basic, don't throw it too, like with gusto. It's sort of like, you just kind of flick it. Yeah? And this, and then here you sort of see there's some, this is where I lose my mask because this is really not possible, and this is where we wait. Okay, now we wait. Okay? It's looking good. So you have the plaster nicely and dense on the surface. Yeah? Sometimes just blow a little bit. Make sure you don't faint, because this is really, you know. And make sure, sometimes don't try to kind of get your fingers onto the surface, because then you mix now. We've got a watery surface here, and if we start to kind of, if you start poking and rubbing, you mix the clay into your plaster. You don't want that. You do not touch this. Okay, that's rule number 1. Where's the little trowel? I just had to mix. Sometimes quite good to have something like this. Thank you. So for this, what I do now here, I just sort of mark my mold. Yeah, you can sort of see the plaster is sort of still very, very runny. So we're not doing anything for now, but it is sort of staying in place. Yeah. We have to wait. This is usually where you, in the olden days, had time to smoke a cigarette. I do not recommend to smoke a cigarette here. Yeah, but in the olden days, you know, when I was a student, because we smoked when we were, you know, it seems crazy, but yeah, I was smoking cigars when I was a student. And my professor was always asking me for cigars. Seems like a different world. So, yeah, you don't want this to mix too much with a still a little bit too runny. But what you now need to do, gradually build up your layer of plaster, yeah? And you do not want to wait here and then go for your lunch and then come back, because you want to work wet in wet. And this is why it's good, for example, if you have somebody and you start with one bucket, this is the point where your mate is already mixing the next bucket. Because then you can bring in, when this is gradually drying up, you already, when it's still wet, you bring in the next bucket. You do not want to wait until, because then they don't connect. Yeah? You want to have a nice, solid negative form, not layer. You don't want to have like layers you can sort of peel off, because it will disconnect. Yeah. Okay, now it's getting a little bit more interesting. It's still a little bit too runny, and make sure you use all your plaster. Now this is where you can go really, really quickly. When the plaster hardens, you will see, wow, this is, then you really need to be quick. Yeah? And now, let's have a look. You want the consistency not quite like this, a little bit thicker. It has to be, what's a good way to describe it? Like thick cream. Basically, if you want it to throw it, you want to stick it. This is also, if you bring it into, the classic mistake to do is you bring it in and then you kind of try to hold it with your hands, and then it's just disaster, because now your clay underneath is actually quite wet now through the moisture of the plaster. So you do not want to touch it. And when you start agitating the plaster, it gets runny again, and then sometimes you think, oh, I've got this nice cluster, you start moving it and the whole thing goes bang, drops down. Yeah? So you do not want to have that. This is also a point where I prefer to kind of work with a trowel. It's not quite there yet. Still remember, you still have a bucket here. Yeah? So this is all the same mix. We all mix this at the same time. And you can sort of see, this is now getting remarkably firm. So, for example, this is already much, much firmer. So we want to be with our mold around here. Yeah? Make sure that the bottom part is stable and solid. You want to have quite a nice chunk on the bottom, because that gives stable. So all along here, what's happening, you can have the odd thin part here, but all along here, you want to have a nice thick layer of plaster. It's a bit like a skeleton that holds the whole thing together. Yeah? So, yeah, I'm just going to demonstrate it with still a little bit I prefer to work it with a trowel. Not quite there yet. I can build up the bottom here, but it's still not quite there yet. But it starts sticking here. And this is now very tempting. You have something here, you start kind of wanting to poke it, just leave it. At the moment, we just want to get the plaster on, and you start from your side. So what I will do is, I will build up plaster along here and along here. Yeah? So I think we're getting gradually there. So I leave this and move on the other side. And it's always very tempting to kind of fill areas. You will always, for example, here on the bottom, I will always have enough plaster because inevitably plaster will run down. What we need to make sure is that these exposed areas, they need plaster. Yeah? So sometimes it's quite useful. What I learned, beginners sometimes, you can actually put little wooden sticks in here. If you're not quite sure, use a thin wooden stick and make them as long as your metal strip on the side. Then you know you need, because sometimes you get lost, you don't really know what's underneath and where it is. You can actually put a little wooden stick in here, then you know you need to build it up to that thickness. Huh? Okay, now I go to my second one. This is still very runny, yeah? Whereas here, this is almost hard. That's the beauty of plaster. The more you move it, the quicker it dries. Yeah? And what I can do is, again, I decant some of it into my decanting basket, leave this there, and I continue to build this up here. So now this is a tricky one. Still a little bit runny, too runny. So we want, this is a tricky one. Perhaps here, lily hands, you smack it in. Don't use too much force. So I build the areas on the side up, and along here on the ridge start to run. Not quite there yet. Another one there. This is the tricky bit there. We need to wait. This is good enough. Here we have still an awful lot to bring onto. now you also realize why I want you to cover your back end up, the back side. You would have just a huge mess there. This is a tricky one, this overhang. Here, it's already getting quite. So, and this is where it kind of gets, we still need to build up that area a little bit. And this is now where the plaster gets rather hard, and that's also quite the time when it gets easier. So when you smear this on, stop, don't go back again, leave it for a minute. It's basically now, take it, indicate where you need more here, and leave it. It's all about getting the plaster on, and then we've got this ridge here where we definitely need something. And this ridge. Look, if I would touch this, this would just drop down. I'll just leave it. And, it's not looking bad here. Oh, that's our top, fine. It's all about bringing the plaster on. Yes, it's very tempting to kind of go like, oh, I want to kind of even it out. Leave it. Leave it, leave it, leave it. It takes quite a lot of discipline to do that. Yeah. So we're just building this up. This is where it kind of sticks, yeah? This is where you can really, and now we kind of conclude the mold. On, you want to use all the plaster you have. You might need a little bit more, but might just work out fine. That's why I have some chamomile. You should afterwards make sure your hands are cream. And now, this is where you even out your mold. Don't push too hard. So you just even, and you make sure. I usually start from that because now you really don't know where you are. So you build it from your side, yeah? So you have your, look here, it's far too much. I just basically follow along my metal line here, yeah? So you can just follow your metal line. Because you know, and make sure you have enough along your metal line. Yeah. So first you're just going to scrape this down. Over here, metal line is here. This needs something. Yeah, this needs something as well. So this is basically what I'm building up. Is this needs a little bit there. This might be a little bit thin there. And then you just compress it. This is where you can push it a little bit. And this is probably fairly thin here. Careful when you come to the metal edge. we're getting there. So you just kind of push it in. Yeah. So you just need to make sure that you have enough plaster along your metal line, then you'll be good. Yeah? I'm pretty sure some of this here is probably fairly thin, but if you have a nice strong skeleton, and then, so basically here just run this along. This is structurally not very strong anymore, but you can perhaps stick it there. Okay. Looking fairly decent. Okay, and this is the first part of your part mold, yeah? So first part is done. Stop. Close enough?
Yeah.
Yeah. You need to see, not concentrate on me, concentrate on this. Yeah? Okay. Are we filming? Okay. Good. So once we have finished the first cast, you need to act quickly. You need to scrape your edge while your foil is still on. So while this is still covered in your plastic, you use a sling and cut your edge down. Yeah? So you cut your edge down while the plastic is still on, because then all the debris can fall down on the plastic. So you start from the top and you work your way up. This is very soon, once this is still fairly soft. You don't want to wait too long, because it will then, now this is really hard. You want to cut this down literally 2 minutes after you finish this. Yeah? So you cut your edge down and take the metal off. And then you use Vaseline or some other insulating agent and you brush the edge. Yeah? So you insulate this edge, because we're going to put another negative mold. We're going to cast the mold now from this side. Yeah? So make sure that you act quickly. Once you finish casting, literally a minute later, you cut the edge down. Yeah? Otherwise it gets too hard. Right? Okay, stop. So we did cast the second part from this side. This is now, if you feel it, you can sort of feel this is still warm, this is cold, so this is still hardening up, but this feels solid. You can sort of feel it when the plaster is solid. Yeah? So don't try to do this too early. Okay, now we need to kind of split this cast into two parts. That's why we insulated it with Vaseline. Yeah? When we cast this and it's still soft, again we use a sling or another sharp tool and we find our edge. For example, here is a lock. So wherever we can find, this looks like a good place to drive in. Make sure you have nice sharp wedges, something like this. Sean has cut us some really nice ones. What I also do, usually I want to free up the bottom. So what I'm going to do is give this a little bit of a knock, so the mold doesn't stick. Yeah? So it doesn't stick. So it's kind of, this is already free. Yeah? Excellent. Right. Now it's time to drive the molds apart. This you need to do carefully. So I can see, perhaps I can actually use my glasses so I can see something that might be quite useful. Here we go, excellent. So I can sort of see, yeah, this is where the joint, this is, sometimes see a slight discoloring. So what I'm going to do is, I drive this wedge in and it doesn't go where I want it to go. and you can sort of see the joint slightly opening. Don't overdo it. You have to do this carefully. Have a lot of wedges available. This looks like and you can sort of see the crack appearing ever so slightly. Let's try this. Now, where is it? Here. This is a good spot. Don't drive the wedges in too deeply. Now here. And always drive the wedge in where you have a bit of a crack appearing. Yeah. This is where the water comes in. Just pour a bit of water into the crack. Let's try to kind of push it here. Just a crack, yeah. We are cooking here. This is quite a big mold, so we need plenty of wedges. Yeah, and don't push the wedges in here, and don't, because then you will put a lot of tension on your mold and it will crack. Yeah, so you need to ease it off from all sides. See. So don't be too hard on your mold, yeah? This is a bit where you need a little bit of patience. This is sometimes not quite sure where the edge is here. Is it there? Oh, I think it's there. Now we're cooking. And this is the only time where I quite like to have a spatula. This can sort of wrench it apart. You can also sort of push on the edges here. It is practically apart. And this is where you make sure, because you don't want it to stick on the bottom here. Come on. And now you also will realize we have a little crack, that doesn't matter. Sort of wrench it apart. And now it sort of depends on very much on your What? Okay. So this is nice. This is looking good. Yeah. So let's put this. It's always good when you have one. So for example here, this seems to be a little bit thin on this side, but you are on a winning. So I don't want to force this now. So what the student needs to do now, you take the clay off, and then you basically work your way away and take this off. You have one good mold, and then so it's quite easy to piece these two pieces on top of here. Yeah. So this is not terrible. And please, let's put this somewhere on it. This clay will be recycled. We will reuse this. Take the big lumps out. Just kind of save it, yeah, for your fellow students. Careful, you have sharp pieces of wire in here as well. Okay, let's lift this off. Yeah. So, and here you can see this is fairly thin. Yeah, but the nice thing is, the most important thing is the rim. That's why I always urge you, you need to build up this rim. This will give you the stability. What you actually, it's not bad if you have really thin areas, because you need to chisel this away. If you build up a huge lump here, you need to chisel this away. So, obviously, this fits now here. And then this one fits there. It's very easy to fix. Yeah. So this is not a catastrophe. I mean, I had students ending up with 20 pieces. We could still save it. I hope not. Now, what you need to do here is come a little bit closer. So you need to jump for your edge. Very, very important. You need to jump for your edge. So it means you scrape your edge off slightly. We'll come to the reason why much later on. So your edge needs to be just scraped off. Yeah? Like this. And then I want you to kind of, save our wedges. You might want to wash them and then stick them back in. And to clean, use a lump of clay. Obviously, save our clay. We recycle this. And in order to clean your mold, perhaps a little bit slightly, this is how you clean your mold. You tap it. Yeah, it's a little bit wet. But this is how you can, with a slightly drier piece of clay, you tap it. I don't really want you to wash this, because this is already a very good natural barrier, but you want it, you can get this quite clean. You get a slightly drier piece of clay. Yeah. So get a fairly dry piece of clay and tap it. Yeah? And this is how you clean it. And I think we can actually get away with just using a bit of soap to insulate it rather than Vaseline. I'm not keen on Vaseline. I much rather use this in a combination with soap. Yeah? And now, when you have little holes like this is a pretty good cast. Sometimes you get a little hole. Just take a bit of clay and fill that. Yeah? Even big holes, you can sort of almost remodel it and fill it. As long as you have a solid mold here, you can fix pretty much everything. Okay? All right? Okay, let's go back to work.